afternoon, everybody. My name is Nikki and today I'm going to leave you with the question, how do we recognize a life well lived? And I want y'all to take out your outlines and actually flip past the outline part. And you're going to find a handy blank page, and that's there for a reason. I want y'all to take out a pencil and jot down what you believe a life well lived is. And then I'm going to come around and put it in here and write something down that you wouldn't mind me sharing. And I'm hoping that, like, if I do it anonymously, it'll open up a little bit more. So I thought that'd be a good way to get y'all feedback. I can come back.
Come back to me.
Okay.
No, don't let her off.
I wrote a lot of stuff. I just wrote little things. See?
Okay. The last one got my humor button pushed.
See, I just wrote little.
Make everybody else, torment everybody else.
Have fun. Oh no! That wasn't fun.
You could pause.
I wrote lots of little things.
That's fine.
They were all like,
Okay, do you have one, Professor V?
No, I didn't do one. I was playing on my phone.
you didn't even write one, and you got on to me.
I was playing on my phone. Let's checking time.
I haven't even been playing on my phone this whole time.
I wasn't talking about you.
Good, because you usually are. That's why I said that. It's usually me.
No, there's other characters in the room.
It's almost always me. That's why I took offense.
Yeah, I was going to yell at you in small groups, but I just couldn't make myself do it.
Well, I learned from my mistakes.
Okay.
I've learned from my mistakes about doing this stuff.
Alright, so the whole reason I did this is because I want you all to kind of get to thinking about what you think your own personal perceptions are. So, one person said, a life well lived is a life with purpose and ambition. Going out and doing things that make you happy with the people you love and that make you happy and a long life. I think we can all agree with that. Alright, so many studies in positive psychology use happiness and life satisfaction as kind of the measuring stick to measuring your overall life satisfaction. But we need to stop and realize that although feeling happy and satisfied are important goals for our lives, that we can't simply rely on this for a life well lived. Compton and Hoffman in our text talk about in many chapters the different psychological dimensions that measure positive outcomes in life. So this kind of encompasses anything from, we've talked about love and relationships, all the way to career in the workplace. So it can be anything in between or anything in that spectrum. Okay. Now, our former First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, said, "Happiness is not a goal, it's a byproduct of a life well lived." And I agree with that sentiment. Gordon Allport went on to say that happiness should never be a goal, but a probable consequence of full involvement in life. Nor does the hedonistic conception of the pursuit of happiness help us. The state of happiness is not itself a motivating force, but a byproduct of otherwise motivated activity. Happiness is far too incidental and contingent a thing to be considered a goal in itself. So I kind of had this as an illustration of the quote-unquote pursuit of happiness. It can be monetary, it can be the cookie-cutter house with the picket white fence or anything like that, or the perfect life on Facebook, how many friends do I have, or the newest iPhone. We can't simply rely on those things to have a life well lived. Yeah. I wanted to focus.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
it's Lauren Henderson.
I wanted to focus in on the history of this, because when we look at history, if we simply focus in on happiness, we're taking away from the struggles of the people who have lived in the past and their lives that they've lived well. Now, one example of this is Mother Teresa. I think everybody can agree on the fact that we think she had a life well lived. Now, she wasn't necessarily happy and satisfied all the time. Her work with the ill and impoverished didn't necessarily always have her having happiness and satisfaction. But through her love and her compassion and her work with others, this led to give her moments of happiness and satisfaction throughout her life. Another historical event I wanted to delve into is one that's kind of personal to me, and it's the Dust Bowl. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that or not, but most people who've grown up around here know about the Dust Bowl in the 1930s and the Great Depression. So I have a video that kind of touches on that, explains a little bit about it and the adversity that people went through then.
This fall on PBS, they had come to the far edge of the Great Plains in search of a new beginning, in the last place in America where a family could claim a homestead and build a future.
We had the best crop that we had had in 1929, and everything was looking up.
A sea of grass, once the domain of Indians and buffalo, disappeared beneath the blade of a plow.
I saw the whole country transformed in the sunset glow. All the brown prairie turned to gold.
But then it was as if the land rejected them. The rains stopped and the winds came.
We saw this cloud coming in, black dirt. And I'll never forget my grandmother, she said, "You kids run and get together, the end of the world's coming."
It came like a black wall, a tide of destruction that crashed over the broken plains, choking the life out of everything in its path.
You never really escaped the dust. It always found its way in, and that's, I think, what drove people crazy.
Some would pull up stakes and move on, but most stayed, always looking to the promise that next year would be better.
We were just too selfish and we were trying to make money, and it didn't work out.
Ken Burns tells the story of a generation that was buried and what it took to dig out. The Dust Bowl starts Sunday, November 18th at 8, 7 Central, only on PBS.
So I showed you all that clip in order to kind of give you an introduction and explain a little bit about it. But I basically wanted to make the point that the people who went through that event, they weren't necessarily happy, but they possessed dignity, courage, perseverance, faith, and dedication to their families and friends. And now, the reason I'm so personally passionate about that is because my grandfather on my mother's side, him and his parents actually went through the Dust Bowl. And I got handed down stories throughout my life about the adversity that they went through and the trials and tribulations they went through. So maybe I'm biased, but whenever I think of the dignity and courage he possessed and the perseverance it took for them to go through that, I think that I could grant him a life well lived whenever he went on to also, in his life, serve in the military. He was a military policeman. And then he also fought pancreatic cancer in the last years of his life. So I think that he applied these principles to his life, and I think I could grant him a life well lived. So I think that those experiences in your life, the not necessarily good, but also the bad and everything in between, should count towards the judgment of your life well lived. So, with all this, in light of all this, I and the text have come to the conclusion that happiness should not be the only criteria for a good life. Due to the fact that, for one, it's poorly defined in a scientific standpoint, and I say this because it's overall vague, and a person in America versus a person living in Africa would have a completely different view of happiness. So we can't necessarily have one cookie-cutter definition of happiness or a life well lived. So we need to look at all of the factors in the broad spectrum and to see what we consider a good life. My biblical application was 2 Timothy 4:6-8. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, rewards me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. I think whenever we've lived our good life, and we stand before the Lord, we want to be able to tell him, I fought the good fight, I finished the race, and I kept the faith. We want to be able to say that we had a life well lived. So, I want to leave you all with the question, how do you recognize a life well lived? And hopefully today might have altered your opinion on that not necessarily the good, but the bad also plays a part in that. And if y'all have any questions, feel free to ask. Professor,
If you were to sum up your life that you've lived so far, how would you describe it as a life well lived?
Oh my. Summarize like all of my life as a life well lived.
Or you could use an example. It's no right or wrong. I'm just wondering if you look back on the life that you've lived so far, how would it be a life well lived? How do you think?
I think that in my life, I've not only just searched for happiness and satisfaction in my life, that I've tried to help others, and that a lot of the trials and tribulations that I went through in my life has kind of molded that into kind of a resilience, and I've had a life well lived because of that, and that I've used that to help others. So that's what I'd sum up.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a difficult question.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's your subject, so I just thought you'd have that, and you did. Any other questions? All right, let's give it a hand. Good. Okay.